Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000 Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Everyone in the Gotei 13 gets something to do in the 1000 Year Blood War arc of Bleach, whether that means commanding the Shinigami forces from the front lines and taking the sternritter down head on, devising battle plans and strategies from their stronghold, or yes, even making the ultimate sacrifice to enable their next big play. In one way or another, every single major character from among the Shinigami's ranks has a role to fill in the war against the Vandenreich. But the harsh truth is that not every wartime performance is created equally. Certainly, among the captains, their individual efforts and successes vary wildly. From captains who take down multiple sternritter by themselves, to those who, let's face it, barely step foot out of the barracks, in today's video we're going to rank every single captain from the 1000 Year Blood War arc, both those who were captains during the war and those who become captains in the epilogue by their performance in the final arc of Bleach. Which captain was the Soul Society's true saviour? Which was the MVP of the Gotei 13? And which captain would ultimately prove to be dead weight during the Shinigami's darkest hour? We'll be essentially taking everything these characters do during this arc into account in order to see who comes out on top. Of course, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Whose performance was the best in the final arc? Who made the biggest difference in this seemingly unwinnable war? Which captain helped swing the pendulum towards victory the most? Let's take a look. Remember to consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. It's quick and easy to do, and it makes the world of difference in supporting the channel, so thank you so very much to everyone who has subscribed already, and everyone who's thinking about doing so. It really does mean a lot. And yes, consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, if you haven't done already. I just put out a review of a brand new Scrolls-like RPG, open-world RPG in the vein of Skyrim and Oblivion called Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. It's a really cool grimdark take on Arthurian legend, and if you're into that sort of thing, I think you'll get a kick out of the review, so consider checking it out if you haven't done already, and hitting subscribe over there as well. Again, your support does mean the absolute world to me, but no matter how you choose to support me, even if it's just by being here and watching today's video, thank you so very much. Okay, bringing up the rear, perhaps unsurprisingly, is poor old Tetsuzaimon Iba. The one man self-aware enough to realise he doesn't deserve to be captain by the end of the series, yet here he is anyway, failing upwards. Yes, Iba becomes captain of the 7th Division in the story's epilogue after Komamura's sacrifice, and so of the captains, his performance is definitely the most lackluster during the 1000 Year Blood War arc. Iba does absolutely nothing of note during the war against the Quincy's, making barely 3 appearances across the entire arc. His biggest contribution, I guess, is carrying the now devolved Komamura on his back through the destroyed Serete, which, to be fair to him, was a genuinely heartfelt show of loyalty and respect. In the manga, we later see Iba and Komamura squaring off against some Soldats, and, well, that's it. Will the anime improve Iba's standing in the war at all? It's looking unlikely, but who knows? To be honest, Isane Kotetsu, the newly christened captain of the 4th Division, was never going to be at the very bottom of this list, because we know that she spends the majority of the war healing people. Whether that's out on the field, such as when she tries to revive Rose and Kensei, or back in the stronghold when she, along with the likes of Hanataro, helped to fix up those who fell in battle during the second invasion. However, sadly, aside from that, Isane doesn't really get the chance to do anything, and I can't help but think the majority of her contributions likely occur off-screen. In that sense, and this is probably true for all of the 4th Division, she comes across as something of an unsung hero. She of course sets up the makeshift infirmary out in the middle of enemy territory in the second invasion, and she does help to build the gateway to the royal palace, and heads to Varvelt for the final battle, but is unfortunately sniped by Lil Barrow before she can get involved. Oh, Shinji Hirako. I really didn't want to see him this low, but honestly, scouring the 1000 Year Blood War arc, what the captains each individually do it is hard to justify placing him any higher than this. Let's look at his efforts throughout the war. Shinji seems to spend the majority of the first Quincy invasion running around, getting progressively more injured somehow, which is odd considering that for the most part, until the Soldat arrive in chapter 511, the only enemies would be the individual sternritter, yet he never seems to stay fighting in one place. During the second invasion, he's immediately taken out of the battle by Bambietta, and later when he shows up to help Omaida, it's actually Hinamori who defeats the Soldat and heals Soifon. Shinji does help to build the gateway to the palace, and when in Varvelt, he eventually takes on the role of leading the remaining Gotei 13 forces to the foot of the central fortress after Kyoraku leaves to fight Leal, only for Shinji to be instantly knocked unconscious by Gerard Valkyrie. Of course, the anime has ever so slightly improved his standing here. Now he briefly battles the giant alongside Hinamori before rescuing her and preparing to fight with the rest of his Vizard comrades. How far they'll actually get, we don't know, but for now things look pretty rough for the captain of the 5th Division. Again, you know I hate to see him so low, but Rojuro Rose Otoribashi, captain of the 3rd Division, really has to slot in next, I think, only slightly above Shinji, due to him actually battling multiple Sternritter on screen. Unlike Shinji, who as we said seems to get injured all by himself in the first invasion, Rose takes on Nanana after the Sternritter attacks his division, though we don't see their fight play out. In the second invasion, Rose fights Masked Masculine using his bankai, managing to entrap and actually wound the Sternritter before ultimately losing in a pretty humiliating and devastating fashion. Rose is then zombified after being killed by Gremmy and used to battle Mayuri's Rankar. You know, maybe the zombie characters should actually have points detracted from their overall standing if they were actively used to fight the Gotei 13 and their allies, thereby impeding their war effort. Either way, it's pretty dire straits for Rose too, as his zombie self is forced into Mayuri's servitude briefly before he then disappears ignominiously from the rest of the war. However, like with Shinji, the anime promises a slightly more dignified finale for this Vizard, but we'll have to wait and see. And then next up is, you likely guessed it, another Vizard. This time it's the captain of the 9th Division, Kensei Muguruma, whose trajectory looks very similar to Rose's, save for a few crucial differences that allow him to pip the 3rd Division captain, in my opinion. Unlike Rose, Kensei's opponent during the first Quincy invasion is never revealed, but he does actively spend time training Hisagi in the aftermath of that initial battle, attempting to help his vice-captain acquire bankai. In the second invasion, Kensei saves Hisagi's life, defending him directly from Masked Masculine before activating bankai himself and battling the Sternritter. Kensei, however, is swiftly and savagely defeated before being killed by Gremmy and later zombified by Giselle. Once Mayuri manages to turn zombie Kensei to his service, unlike Rose, Kensei actually gets the chance to get involved in the war once again, knocking out the love-deranged Hisagi, returning Byakuya's Zanpakuto to him, and beating Pepe senseless. Again, while this is the end of Kensei's journey in the manga, he's reappeared in the anime alongside the other Vizard. Next on the list is another Vizard, and one of the newly elected captains, Lisa Yadomaru, the new captain of the 8th Division. As one of the Vizard who remained in Karakura Town, Lisa gets involved in the overarching war effort more than you might think, as she's part of the cleanup crew that helps to seal the many rifts appearing between worlds as a result of the Vandenreich's actions, before collecting the energy gathered there and passing it on to Yoruichi for use in helping both Ichigo and his friends, and then later the Gotei 13, reach the Royal Palace, which is the main reason I've placed her above both Kensei and Rose. So while you might have initially thought actually it's not very fair to include characters like Lisa who weren't actively a part of the Gotei 13 and therefore weren't included in the battles, it's actually worked out better for her as she has a more meaningful impact on the overall war itself. Lisa returns to help charge the gateway to the palace and launches an attack on Gerard Valkyrie, only to be defeated in a single hit from the sternritter. However, as with the other Vizard, Lisa's arc has been altered slightly, and now she's gearing up for, hopefully, a more fitting final showdown. Before we continue with the rest of the list, first a word from today's sponsor. This month, visit the island of Kyushu and shop at a Japanese konbini with Tokyo Treat and Sakuriko's latest snack subscription boxes. Today, I'm going to take a look at what's in store. Tokyo Treat is an exclusive monthly snack box that delivers the latest treats from Japan straight to your door. This month, Tokyo Treat's theme is konbini snacking, helping you to peruse the shelves of Japan's iconic convenience stores with snacks like matcha chocolate Kit Kats, mini melon pan biscuits, butter soy sauce potato sticks, and many more. We've done a lot of chocolate items in recent months, so we're going to start things off this time with what I think is some kind of a sour apple gummy. Let me just consult the booklet and find out for sure. Look at that, I was absolutely right. A sour paper candy apple. Okay, wow, there he is. He is very green. It smells very strongly of apple, so let's dive right in. See, now this is very up my alley. This is absolutely delicious. I love sour gummies, sour sweets. So yeah, more of this sort of thing, and I will be very, very happy. And of course, each month you also get a special fancy flavour of Kit Kat. This is going to be a pretty green month by the looks of things. First the sour apple and now these matcha Kit Kats, so let's give them a try. Well, as promised, this is maybe the greenest Kit Kat I've ever seen, so let's dive right in. It's got quite a strong, recognisable flavour. If you like matcha tea, then this is absolutely going to be for you. Meanwhile, Sakuriko's theme this month is Taste of Kyushu, delivering a box that captures the unique character of the island's 7 prefectures and the diversity found within. Thanks to such snacks as the Yokoro chocolate wafer, Nagasaki honey castella, and of course the Chiran Ryokucha tea. So it seems the chopsticks this month can come in either a red or a black variety, and we got the black one. So first of all, we're going to look at this, which is an Amao Strawberry Crunch, and this has like the coolest, quaintest packaging I think I've ever seen out of one of these boxes. Hakata Thumbelina, it says on the front. So that's very similar to here in the UK anyway. I don't know what they're called elsewhere. Probably the same thing, to be honest, but very similar to like a Rice Krispie square, something like that. Really nice, but this one has a strawberry touch to it, and it goes really well. Plus, I want to know the mystery behind Hakata Thumbelina. And then last but certainly not least, we have the Kumamoto Watermelon Gummies. Like I said at the start, this is a gummy run month for me for the most part, I think. Very, very tasty. That's really good stuff. I have to readjust my glasses once again. So each box also comes with a cultural booklet that features snack descriptions, allergen information, and of course some insights into the cultural theming of the month's boxes. Since we don't have 7-Eleven here at all in the UK, this is probably about as close to a Japanese konbini as I'm ever going to get, unless I eventually go to Japan, hopefully at some point in the future. Alright, but that's it for June's boxes. As always, I want to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakuriko for supporting the channel each month. It really is appreciated. Enjoy the taste of Kyushu and snacks that call back to Japan's iconic konbini from the comfort of your own home by following the link in the description or the pinned comment down below for an exclusive offer of $5 off of your first order. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. Okay, and up next, this is where things are going to start to get tricky. This is where the list gets the murkiest, in my opinion, this kind of middle-of-the-pack section that will be the hardest to define. And so to begin with, we have one who is slightly difficult to pin down. The captain of the 10th Division, Toshiro Hitsugaya, who you might be very surprised to see this quote-unquote low on the list. He's a big player in the war against the Vandenreich, but when you break it down, when you look at his performance on the board, what does he really achieve? Hitsugaya battles Kangdu in the first invasion, before training to fight without his bankai in the aftermath. In the second invasion, Hitsugaya is ruthlessly defeated by Bazby, before having his bankai restored by Kisuke and using it to freeze Kangdu, securing a win. So yes, Hitsugaya defeats a sternritter, but much like Soifon before him in the same chapter, he fails to actually kill his enemy. And not only that, but unlike BG9, Kangdu emerges from the ice almost completely unscathed. Hitsugaya is later zombified and turned against the Gotei 13 by Giselle to great effect, coldly cutting down Ikkaku and Yumichika as well as Charlotte Coolhorn. Honestly, this probably will incur Hitsugaya some kind of penalty in the overall standings. Due to his subsequent rehabilitation period, Hitsugaya is absent for a long time and doesn't help to build the gate to the royal palace, nor does he assist in holding back the Soul King's power when it threatens to consume the Gotei 13. Instead, he's simply carried up to Varvelt in one of Mayuri's dezombification pods. Later, he battles Gerard alongside Kenpachi and Byakuya, and in my opinion is arguably the most ineffective of the three, though I'm not necessarily set on that completely. But Gerard does break out of Hitsugaya's ice every single time, including once Hitsugaya releases his matured bankai. And you know what, I was originally thinking I was going to have Hitsugaya above the next character on this list, and maybe even above the one after that, but actually looking back on all of this, I don't think he deserves that placement at all. He doesn't even wound Kangdu, and he actively brutalizes his own allies as a zombie. When fighting Gerard, Hitsugaya barely injures him, and even once he and the other captains team up to deliver a devastating blast, Gerard survives it anyway. This is a tough one, honestly, because Hitsugaya has it really bad in the final arc, I think, and his overexposure actually acts as a detriment to his performance, working against him the whole time. Next up is another tricky one for me, and one who, as I was writing this video, actually fell precipitously in the rankings. And that's the captain of the 7th Division Sajin Komamura, who, after learning the secret technique of his clan, Jinka no Jutsu, succeeds in taking down Bambietta. In the first invasion, Komamura battles the explosive sternritter and successfully rallies his troops to continue fighting, even in the face of her wanton destruction. By the time of the second invasion, Komamura arrives on the battlefield to prevent Bambietta from razing more of the Serete to the ground, now equipped with his new power. And the anime actually emphasizes Komamura's efforts even more, as it reveals that the only reason he turned back from his path to Yhwach was to rescue Shinji and Hinamori from the Sternritter, who was in the process of overpowering the Vizard captain. With Komamura stepping in to save the 5th Division, he unveils his new human form to Bambietta and, using his transformed bankai, overpowers and easily defeats the Quincy, bringing her crashing to the ground. And even though Soifon punches a massive hole in BG9, certainly in the anime with BG9 revealing that he can repair himself, I'd argue that of these three, Hitsugaya, Komamura and Soifon, Komamura is the only one with a truly definitive victory. However, having said that, Bambietta's fate is much the same as Kangdu and BG9's, something that is emphasized in the anime. While she's beaten by Komamura and seemingly rendered immobile, her ultimate fate is left in someone else's hands entirely. Meanwhile, Komamura transforming due to his curse renders him useless, absolutely useless for the rest of the war. He's not around to help build the gateway to the palace, he's not around to fight back against Ryo's power, and he's not around to go to Varvelt. So up next, we have an entry that actually surprises me, because I wouldn't have thought that she would have gone above Hitsugaya and Komamura, but actually breaking down and looking at what the captain of the 2nd Division, Soifon, achieves in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, while not impressive, I think is actually better overall than those two prior entries. Now, she doesn't really get much time to shine in the final arc at all. She battles BG9 in the first invasion and then again in the second. Now, of course, when Soifon arrives to fight BG9 in the second invasion, she does so by rescuing Omaida, who was probably mere seconds away from death, as BG9 actively was firing his minigun at the time Soifon arrived, hence why she ends up using her speed to intervene and grab the bullets in mid-flight before destroying the gun. So she saves the life of her vice captain in that moment, which again is a pretty big deal. And with the way the anime slightly restructures what happens to Mareo, Soifon technically saves her life as well. Although Soifon is swiftly and mercilessly defeated by the robot sternritter initially, after her bankai is restored to her, the captain manages to score a devastating hit on the sternritter, but she doesn't kill him. If Soifon had succeeded in actually killing BG9, I might be inclined actually to move her up a little on the list, since so few Shinigami achieve said feat, but she doesn't. However, BG9 is critically injured by Soifon's bankai, unlike Kang-Do, who seems no worse for wear. Yes, BG9 is executed for his failure, but that's not Soifon's doing. That's the Vandenrijk's terrible excuse for upper management in effect. Afterwards, Soifon helps to build the gateway to the royal palace and attempts to fight off the Soul King's power, but is overwhelmed even with her bankai, but at least unlike the prior two, she is there for these communal efforts. Once in Varvelt, however, Soifon disappears entirely. Now, in the anime, she's shown aiming her bankai at Gerard after he uses the miracle, for some reason standing right in front of him, only to be predictably swatted aside. And so the reason then I place her above Hitsugaya and Komamura is really for the reasons I outlined in Hitsugaya's entry specifically. Despite him having much more screen time, a lot of that time is actually detrimental to the Gotei 13's overall war effort, and the rest of it he basically spends getting beaten up. And not only that, but Soifon at the very least, like I said, helps to build the gateway to the palace and fight Reio's power, while Hitsugaya just sits it out. Inadvertently, but still. I dunno, these last three are pretty tough. Are Hitsugaya's contributions in the battle with Gerard enough to tip the scales here in his favour? Let me know your thoughts, because honestly, sitting back and looking at this, I'm genuinely surprised to see Soifon above Hitsugaya and Komamura, but it kind of makes sense when you look at it holistically. Right, moving on, we have probably one of two captains whose contributions are the absolute hardest to rank, in my opinion. First up is the captain of the 4th Division, Retsu Unohana, who I was kind of considering dropping potentially a few places. The problem with Unohana is kind of twofold in a way. She doesn't really get involved at all before her big moment, which comes pretty early on in the arc, and then after her big moment, well, she's dead. In fact, maybe it's threefold, because also her big moment in the arc doesn't really bear fruit in the way you might have expected back in the day. But we'll get to that in a bit. She and the rest of the 4th Division are ordered to remain in the barracks by Yamamoto during the first Quincy invasion, meaning they are unable to lift a finger to help anyone. Immediately afterwards, Kyoraku enlists her in training Zaraki in the way of the sword, and Unohana battles the 11th Division captain in Muken, revealing her true bloodthirsty persona. And as Unohana repeatedly kills and revives Zaraki hundreds of times over, he finally unlocks his latent, suppressed power and cuts her down, even hearing his Zanpakuto's voice for the first time, which is a big deal. This is Unohana's only real contribution to the war effort, transforming Zaraki into a total monster theoretically by helping him to awaken his true power, the power he once overcame her with as a child centuries ago. And now, this is another tough one for me. Like I said, I've been umming and ahhing about maybe dropping her a few places, despite not being involved in really any of the war. Unohana does rank higher than those that came before her, tentatively, due to her contribution having an actual tangible effect on a major player. The problem with Unohana, though, as I mentioned, is threefold, and that third portion of the problem is that her sacrifice spurred much debate, with readers questioning whether her death was even worth it. Unohana herself is not only an immensely skilled fighter, but the greatest healer the Soul Society has ever known. And compounding this issue even further is, to be fair, something no one could have foreseen. The fact that Zaraki himself goes on to have little to no impact on the war whatsoever from this point forwards. Certainly not the kind of impact you would sacrifice Unohana for, at least, that's to be sure. Still, I'm content, I guess, with having Unohana here for now. And then we have another captain finding themselves in somewhat similar circumstances, the captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Ukitake, who, like Unohana for all intents and purposes, doesn't really do anything for the vast majority of the war. But when he does finally step up, he does so in a pretty big and meaningful way. Ukitake faces a sternritter during the first invasion, likely Askin in my opinion. I know some people think it's Nyanzol, but when you count up the supposed number of Reiatsu that the R&D department can sense, and then you count up every sternritter that should be there, there's no real room for Nyanzol, before he vanishes entirely for the second invasion, secretly sequestered away, invoking the ritual of Kamikake in preparation for the worst case scenario. Ukitake anticipates Yhwach succeeding in killing the Soul King, and so prepares to transform himself into the right arm of Ryo when the time comes, to act as an anchor for the world. And of course, this is exactly what happens after Yhwach kills Ryo and the worlds begin to collapse. Ukitake sacrifices himself to stabilize Ryo, even if only momentarily, but it is enough. Ukitake holding the world in place gives the Gotei 13 the time they desperately need to continue building the gateway to the palace, while Yhwach himself changes tact and decides to essentially become the new Soul King instead, at least for a time. Still, it's a shame Ukitake had to die to achieve this, and in the manga it's hard to not see his sacrifice as being at least somewhat in vain. Plus, him dying seriously costs the collective effort of the Shinigami trying to build the gate, as he had immense Ryoryoku that was basically building it all by himself. However, the anime seems to be hinting at something much bigger, much meatier in the works for Ukitake and Mimihagi, so we'll have to wait and see. Okay, but we've finally reached the captains who actively kill Sternritter. And as you can see, that gives them a pretty hefty boost up the rankings in my estimation. A Shinigami killing a Sternritter is a fairly big deal overall, considering how rarely it happens during the war. So these guys come out on top. And we're starting things off with the captain of the 13th Division, Rukia Kuchiki, who kills Sternritter F. Asnod during the second invasion. Now, Rukia's performance in the first invasion isn't great. She battles Meninas until getting distracted by Byakuya's sudden defeat, allowing Meninas to cut her down with ease. After recuperating in the royal palace, Rukia returns to the battlefield in the second invasion considerably stronger, now understanding the true nature of her Sode no Shirayuki. She rescues the near-dead Kensei and Rose, spiriting them across the battlefield and ensuring they reach Isane in the infirmary. Then, releasing her bankai, Rukia is able to kill Asnod, securing a major victory for the Gotei 13. But, in the pursuit of complete fairness, Rukia was doomed were it not for Byakuya's last-minute intervention. Unlike Renji, who decimates Masked Demasculine no questions asked, Rukia succumbed to the fear, and was on the verge of losing before Byakuya stepped in. Still, she does kill the Sternritter, and that counts for a lot, before later arriving to help Ichigo once he joins the fighting. Rukia briefly battles Basby before heading to the Shinigami stronghold, where she helps to build the gate to the royal palace. Unfortunately for Rukia, this is really where her relevance in the war falls off a cliff. Upon arriving in Varvelt, she's defeated by Gerard, before later reaching Silburn to once again assist Ichigo, but by the time she gets there, Ichigo is beaten and Yhwach has escaped. But I'm hopeful the anime has maybe some additional plans for Rukia's final stretch of the war effort. Reaching the top 5 captains now, and in 5th place we have the captain commander of the Gotei 13 and captain of the 1st Division, Shigekuni Genryusai Yamamoto, whose role in the war is brutally cut short. But for a time, he's easily one of the most influential power players on the battlefield. After Sasakibe is killed before his eyes, Yamamoto orders the Gotei 13 to immediately prepare for war, 1,000 years of steady leadership beginning to crumble around him as rage clouds his judgment. Still, once the Vandenreich inevitably attack, Yamamoto gets involved quickly, saving Hisagi from almost certain death when he deflects Driscoll's arrow at the last moment, the same arrow that ended Sasakibe's life. Yamamoto then of course incinerates the sternritter in a single hit, killing sternritter O before rampaging across the war-torn Serete. And Yamamoto's rage is felt palpably throughout the battlefield, and he inspires the Shinigami to try and at least turn the tables. Yamamoto's fury pushes the likes of Komamura, Hitsugaya, Soifon, and Kyoraku to straighten up and fight back, resulting even in Kyoraku landing a huge hit on Robert. Later, as Royd is about to kill the now comatose Kenpachi, Yamamoto arrives with an explosive force, rescuing another Shinigami from almost certain death. Although he doesn't kill them, he then wipes out another 3 sternritter with ease. Using his bankai, Yamamoto then completely overwhelms Royd before dealing him the finishing blow, erasing a vast portion of Royd's body. And so, while Yhwach arrives to finish Royd off himself, Yamamoto is essentially the one who killed Sternritter Y. I mean, he wasn't getting back up from that. Before the head captain himself is unfortunately callously killed in battle minutes later. You could argue that Yamamoto's blind rage, which ultimately started a chain reaction leading to his downfall and eventual demise, leading the Gotei 13 to be leaderless for a moment at such a crucial juncture, was a big detriment to the war effort overall. But ultimately, I think the Gotei 13 pulls itself back from the brink in a big way. And the major driving force behind the Gotei 13 pulling itself back from oblivion's edge is in fact the former captain of the 8th Division, now the captain commander, and the captain of the 1st Division, Kyoraku Shinsui. Kyoraku is another, slightly trickier captain to gauge on this list, as his influence and his performance in the war extends far beyond the simple front line. During the first invasion, Kyoraku battles but is ultimately bested by Robert before stepping up to the plate in the wake of his father figure's death. In a time of crisis, where the captains are divided like never before, Kyoraku unites them, displaying his leadership prowess. He then authorizes Unohana to train Zaraki in the way of the sword, and leads the Gotei 13 during the second invasion. But of course, Kyoraku's biggest contributions come later. In a highly unorthodox move, he releases Aizen from prison in order to help rescue the Gotei 13 from the Soul King's overflowing power, effectively saving the lives of all the Shinigami there. In the anime, Kyoraku gathers all the remaining soldiers together and galvanizes them to prepare for their final showdown. Once in Varvelt, Kyoraku again leads the offensive, before eventually battling the leader of the Schutzstaffel, Lil Baro, and ultimately taking him down alongside Nanao, the two of them supporting each other to defeat this angelic threat. So, while Kyoraku doesn't actively engage that many Sternritter, he does take on one of the top dogs, and even more importantly, his influence is far-reaching, and felt constantly throughout the arc as he commands their forces, and operates from the shadows to push through orders and strategies that Yamamoto would have never allowed, doing whatever it took to defeat the enemy. Ultimately, the Gotei 13 end up achieving victory over the Vandenreich in this war due to a number of totally different factors, but they get as far as they do thanks to Kyoraku's unusual leadership. And now we've arrived at the top 3. These are the captains with the absolute best of the best performances of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, those who truly were totally instrumental to the Gotei 13's victory over the Vandenreich. And starting things off, we have the captain of the 6th Division, Byakuya Kuchiki, one of the most important and influential people of the entire final arc and the war against the Sternritter. Now, I've mentioned before that Byakuya and Kenpachi are written to reflect one another throughout the entire series, but never is that more apparent than in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Where Kenpachi has a mostly pretty strong first invasion, Byakuya's is of course disastrous. Although he arrives to save Renji's life from Asnod and Masked Masculine, even effortlessly dispatching of the latter, Byakuya is almost killed by Asnod, and reduced to tears as he pleads for Ichigo to protect the Soul Society in its darkest hour. Now, while it's possibly my favourite moment in the entire series, there's also no denying it's a low point for the prideful captain. However, as of the second invasion, things improve dramatically for Byakuya, and I'd say overall, he has a stronger second invasion than Kenpachi does. His training in the royal palace allows him to reach totally new heights, and he returns to the battlefield to help not only save Rukia's life in her fight with Asnod, but give her the encouragement she needed to push through, activate Bankai, and win. Byakuya then arrives alongside Rukia to help defend Ichigo from the gathered sternritter and defeats 3 of them, Robert, Nanana, and Candice, without sustaining any damage. While Byakuya doesn't kill any of them, they are also, by our estimations, ostensibly stronger than at least Jerome and his The Roar, and likely Berenice and The Question. Afterwards, Byakuya returns to the stronghold to help build the gateway to the palace, and when in Varvelt, he battles Gerard Valkyrie. And notably, Byakuya is the only captain to last the entire duration of the fight, taking on Gerard from the very start, being one of the first to engage him alongside Renji, to the point where he causes Gerard's initial transformation, and then being one of the very last captains standing, outlasting Kenpachi and even delivering the very final attack. And so that brings us to our runner-up, Kenpachi Zaraki, the captain of the 11th Division, who has a pretty interesting and weird time of it in the final arc. Things start out extremely well for Kenpachi, perhaps better than any other captain, and he makes an enormous impact on the first invasion. While the rest of the Gotei 13 is just completely floundering, Kenpachi is in his element, and he straight up kills 3 sternritter. Sternritter R, Jerome, Sternritter Q, Berenice, and Sternritter Y, Lloyd, which was a huge and much needed win for the Shinigami. To be honest, considering how difficult most Shinigami found it to secure a kill or even a win against a Sternritter, this is a massive feat that can't really be overstated. Of course, immediately after this, Kenpachi is admittedly beaten into a coma by Royd Lloyd even with his eye patch removed. That being said, Kenpachi's arc takes a weird turn in the aftermath of the first invasion. While I think Kenpachi absolutely had the potential to be perhaps the biggest driver of the war effort in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, his influence in the war takes a bit of a nosedive. For starters, you could argue he costs the Gotei 13 enormously when he kills Unohana, though to be fair to him, he didn't necessarily want nor advocate for that move to be made, and in fact the fault there lies more with those pulling the strings, Kyoraku and Unohana herself. But then after that, despite Unohana dying to unlock Kenpachi's true latent strength, the truth is he never really does anything with it, and actually doesn't win a single fight, conventionally at least, from the second invasion onwards. Revealing his Shikai, Kenpachi overwhelms Gremmy in his first big fight back, but Gremmy ultimately accidentally kills himself, there's no question about it. Kenpachi is then ambushed and savagely beaten by the Bambis to the point of near death. Kenpachi Zaraki thinks he is about to die, that he is witnessing his last moments, before later being rescued by Ichigo and then being healed. He then helps everyone build the gate to the royal palace, but upon arriving in Varvelt, Kenpachi is almost immediately defeated by Pernida in a gruesome and pretty definitive way. Even when he does get the chance to redeem himself, Kenpachi is unable to defeat Gerard even after using his Bankai, and his only contribution at the very climax of that fight is to cause Gerard to fall over, while Hitsugaya and Byakuya team up to deliver the actual finishing blow. So, while Kenpachi does have a huge impact on the war initially, and his performance looks pretty good at the outset, it does taper off quite dramatically, to the point where he suffers a string of defeats. And to be honest, were what I've mentioned so far everything he does in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, I would have placed him at 3rd beneath Byakuya. However, what enables him to rise above Byakuya in my books is, of course, him using his Shikai to destroy Gremmy's meteor in the second invasion, thus protecting the Serete and potentially saving the lives of everyone, Shinigami and Quincy included. Now, who's to say these powerful captains would have been killed definitively by the meteor? I mean, it seems pretty likely to me, but we ultimately don't know. And even more importantly, who's to say another extremely powerful captain couldn't have destroyed the meteor themselves? Again, we simply don't know. But what we do know, for a fact, is that Kenpachi stepped up and he succeeded. However, the top spot was pretty much uncontested for me from the moment I started this video, and I imagine you all saw this coming a mile away. In regards to their performance in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, their contributions to the war effort overall, the absolute, unquestionable MVP of the Gotei 13 was of course Mayuri Kurotsuchi, the captain of the 12th Division. Before the war even begins, Mayuri authorizes the extermination of an entire village worth of Rukongai residents, and while that doesn't sound great on paper, it's done to prevent the total collapse of the worlds as the Vandenreich purposefully upset the balance prior to their invasion. And during the first invasion, Mayuri actually doesn't do that much. He analyzes the bankai stealing power of the sternritter, presumably learning that they do in fact steal the bankai, but it's too late. The captains have already had their bankai stolen. However, in the aftermath of the invasion, Mayuri is hard at work behind the scenes, quickly deducing that the sternritter used the shadows to move around in. And as a result, by the time the second invasion rolls around, Mayuri has adequately prepared. While the entire Serete is consumed by shadow and transformed, only his laboratory remains unscathed, as Mayuri has lined it with floodlights designed to eliminate shadows from every surface, completing that getup with his sunsuit outfit. Thanks to this, Mayuri's laboratory becomes the Shinigami's only place of real refuge from the Quincy onslaught, and quickly becomes their safe haven, their base of operations throughout the war. Mayuri steps out onto the battlefield, however, and using both his zombified Arankar and his own intelligence, he defeats Sternritter Z Giselle, and even manages to turn her own zombies against her, subsequently rescuing several dead Shinigami at the same time. Hitsugaya, Matsumoto, Rose, and Kensei all directly owe Mayuri their lives. And although we don't know it yet, so too does the revived Izuru. Mayuri goes on to rehabilitate all of them, restoring them to fighting form once again. Using his Reiatsu amplifier, he provides the final boost the Gotei 13 need to finish building the gate to the Royal Palace, and takes his zombies to Varvelt with him. In the manga, we only see Hitsugaya and Matsumoto restored, but the anime has expanded Mayuri's efforts even further by resurrecting Rose and Kensei much earlier than we ever saw in the manga. And then, of course, Mayuri saves Kenpachi's life by paralysing him after the captain has been ensnared by Pernida's nerves, which would have certainly resulted in his death. Mayuri and Nemu then take on Pernida, with Mayuri eventually overcoming the left arm of the Soul King and killing Sternritter C, though not without losing Nemu beforehand. But still, Mayuri is the clear MVP of the current captains of the Gotei 13, those involved in the war and those who are promoted later on. His performance in the war covers all aspects of the battle, from strategizing and helping to prepare the battlefield, to rescuing and reviving his fellow soldiers, to even fighting and defeating Sternritter head-on. Mayuri absolutely comes out on top overall. And you can even get a sense of just how much he's doing for the Gotei 13 as a whole by the amount of times people uncharacteristically thank him in the arc. Kubo actively makes a point of showcasing the gratitude that Mayuri is receiving, and of course disgusts him, but it's an indicator of just how much he is doing, how much he is now actually fighting for the bigger picture. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. How do you feel about my list, about the captains I believe had the best performance, were the most integral to the Shinigami's war effort throughout the 1000-Year Blood War arc? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Every single captain ranked from this arc, and those who were promoted to captain in the epilogue as well. Do please let me know your thoughts. Maybe I've got the wrong person sitting atop the list. Maybe the top 5 could be changed, or maybe your issues are with the lower end of the list. As always, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and read all about them down in the comments, so do please let me know. Okay, everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already to help support the channel. It really does mean a lot as we head for our next milestone of 275,000 subs. No idea how that's managed to come around, but there you have it. And also consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. The milestone is a lot smaller over there. 15,000 subs is what we're aiming for next, but it's a milestone all the same. And your help in pushing us, driving us towards it, would be greatly appreciated. And of course, I have to end things off by saying a massive, everlasting thank you to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, who without this, I simply wouldn't really be able to keep doing this. So your support does mean the absolute world to me. If you want to support me over on Patreon, again, it would be hugely appreciated. And you get perks like getting your name in the credits of every single video alongside everyone else helping to make this possible, and getting my videos over on Patreon totally free of YouTube ads. Okay, everyone, once again, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.